man.
On January 15th, we asked 50 magazine media executives
These questions are tough.
what they think is next.
That is a really excellent question. I think what's next is media thinking outside the parameters of just the keyboard.
What's next? Queens, apparently.
Gen Z is what's next.
Platform diversification.
Figuring out different platforms for telling stories.
I think this will be the year where we finally have great long stories online.
It will be less about the format you're creating stories in and more about the story in itself.
My next job is my boss's job.
My next job doesn't exist yet.
I'm focusing on my current job. I love it.
My next job.
Absolutely no idea.
Pass.
I'm pretty happy in the one I have. I just want to get better at it.
My next job,
Oh, that's a great question. Something really important.
Landscape architect?
I hope my next job is as exciting as the one I have now.
Who's next?
Hillary Clinton.
The youngest generation.
The person behind me, not sure.
Who's next? I think we haven't seen who's next yet.
I would love to see a president of the United States who is a scientist or has a science background. That would be awesome.
Who's next?
I'd like to say that I'm next.
Me. I'm next.
I'm next.
That's who's next.
And I think anybody can really take this moment and run with it.
I'm excited to see who's next.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President and CEO of MPA, the Association of Magazine Media, Mary Berner.
Thank you. And thank you all for schlepping out here in this crappy weather. We appreciate it. Until the not-so-distant past, this is what the pundits and pontificators claim was next for magazine media, and this is why I joined MPA a little over 2 years ago. This relentlessly negative, knee-jerk, and most importantly, inaccurate drumbeat of a narrative about the industry. I was frustrated, I was pissed, I was angry, call it what you will, not simply because the doom and gloom narrative was wrong, but because we were feeding that narrative. Our inability to measure and communicate what I and my industry colleagues knew to be true about the accurate state of magazine media created a vacuum filled by partial facts, which, in the absence of anything else, were used to define our industry. Now, I'm not underplaying the fact that the industry, and all media for that matter, is in the throes of transition and digital transformation with all of the formidable challenges, opportunity, experimentation, learning and expansion, as well as complexity that entails. But against that backdrop, one very, very important thing remains true and constant. Consumer engagement with magazine brands across multiple platforms and formats, which make up the entire content ecosystem, in addition to print, is growing and growing rapidly. And that's the story that needed to be told. Now, of course, within the very dynamic and still unpredictable environment in which we operate, every magazine media company, and every media company for that matter, is testing new revenue models and mixes. And as you will see throughout this entire conference, it's still early days in digital media, so it's simply too early to call what will work. You remember when the prevailing wisdom was that consumers would never pay for digital content, yet digital subscription models for content are becoming more common. Think Pandora, Netflix, subscriptions for big digital games such as Final Fantasy XIV, or Marvel Comics digital inventory. Ultimately, though, whether a brand or a company's business model results in revenue paid directly by consumers or by advertisers seeking to reach these consumers, or hopefully some combination, consumer demand for content, regardless of what kind of media you are, is the critical indicator of vitality for any media brand. And until the dust settles, it is the only and best proxy for determining future potential. And in the wild west of digital, it is also the only common and comparable currency for all media, not just magazine media. The challenge up to this point, of course, has been that companies and brands can and do pick and choose their consumer metrics from a mishmash of disparate measurements. The multiple versions of inflated server-side data available on so-called unique viewers, or even page view counts, which has made an apples-to-apples comparison of consumer demand for media brands difficult, if not altogether impossible. And for an industry which has been getting slammed as heavily as ours was, this lack of standardized, credible metrics to tell a story was a killer. Now, though, through the launch of Magazine Media 360 back in September, we have the ability to consistently measure and compare consumer demand for magazine media across multiple platforms. Now we can confirm with credible third-party data what we've been saying all along, that magazine media's relationships with consumers are strong, are enduring, and are expanding. Now we can provide the accurate, demonstrable narrative about the industry. Magazines are magazine media, as our readers have moved beyond print to now embrace a 360-degree magazine brand experience on digital, mobile, video, and social platforms and formats, in addition to print, moving toward a true omni-channel content distribution strategy. Consumer demand for magazine media across these platforms and formats continues to build. Ergo, not only is the industry not dead, it is growing and is well-positioned for the future as any content provider, if not better. The operative word here is media, reflecting the shift from magazines, which historically almost always refers to the print format of what we do, to magazine media, describing the fact that we now operate and our content is consumed across multiple platforms and formats in addition to print. We define a magazine media brand, at least for now, as a media content brand, and I emphasize the word brand, that usually has a print anchor and distributes mostly differentiated content on non-print platforms as well. So, media, 360, consumer demand, and up. Powerful words for an industry whose history is rooted in the power of words. Across print, digital, web, mobile web, and video, magazine media's gross audience year over year has been growing an average of almost 10% per month. Video viewership of magazine media across the board has been growing an average of 42% per month. Mobile web at 77% per month. And overall, print and digital edition audiences remain flat. Countering the prophets of doom who suggested that magazines would not succeed beyond print, Magazine Media 360 not only confirms the fact that overall magazine media audiences across platforms are growing, but it also illustrates the growing importance of digital platforms and formats to our consumers. What you see here is print and digital editions representing a smaller part of a growing pie. While not surprisingly, this chart confirms that mobile web consumption has almost doubled the past year to almost 17% of the total. The launch of Magazine Media 360 by the industry was a big, a bold, and a game-changing move. It was big because 32 companies, 145 brands, representing 95% of the reader universe are participating. It's bold because it's the first time any media has been able to capture and regularly communicate with complete transparency multi-platform and format consumer demand by brand, which I would argue is also pretty darn courageous as well. Interestingly, two of the first calls I got in September after we launched Magazine Media 360 were from the heads of two other major media trade organizations. You can guess which ones they are. And they were frustrated after years of talking about with their industries how to capture consumer demand across platforms that nothing had gotten done. And they wanted to know how the hell the magazine industry had gotten it done. There was a lot of hand-wringing about how none of their players would ever agree to a common approach, let alone to agree to report on a regular basis by brand. So it's really courageous. It's also game-changing because we have finally started to reset the narrative communicated about our industry to and among our advertisers, the press, our partners, our current and future employees, and our investors, using data that finally captures the accurate scope and scale of consumer demand for magazine media content. What it all comes down to is this. You can't effectively really sell either to consumers or advertisers what you can't measure credibly, consistently, and comparably. And version 1.0 of Magazine Media 360 is a critical first cut at providing those measurements. So, make this accurate industry narrative your mantra. Magazines are magazine media. Consumer demand for magazine media is up. Ergo, the industry is well positioned for future growth. Now, fueled by this growing consumer demand for our content, the what's next is both exciting and daunting as we start to think about and try to navigate the almost limitless possibilities. So before I talk very briefly about what's next, I do want to have a moment about print and the supposed death of print magazines. As the industry transitions from magazine to magazine media, some print magazines are thriving and others struggling. And as consumers and consumer interests shift and change, some brands will grow and some will close. In fact, some should close, just like every other media and every other industry, in fact. By the way, why is it that when the longest-running primetime television series, Gunsmoke, which lasted for 20 years, why is it that it's celebrated as an enormous success when it was canceled? Yet when the monthly print version of Ladies' Home Journal closed after 131 freaking years, 6 times as long, reflecting a secular decline in their target demographic, that's seen as a failure as opposed to one of the most successful media brands of all time, which it is. So we should expect, as a natural business process, some print titles and categories will grow and others won't. Now, overall, however, print magazines are holding steady, notwithstanding that chant about the death of print, which has been fueled in part by the fact that one channel, Newsstand, has indeed been hit hard in the aggregate. That said, the recently launched Dr. Oz magazine had to do a second printing of the title for Newsstand because its initial Newsstand distribution of 375,000 copies sold out so quickly. For various reasons, and I want to point out not the least of which is the secular decline of bricks and mortar retail, you can expect the overall decline of Newsstand to continue in the aggregate. But what is often lost in the discussion of Newsstand is that it represents less than 8% of the total print magazine circulation. And 15 years ago, at its peak, it was still less than 20%. And contrary to the story that focusing on Newsstand only might tell you, total audience for print magazines, which is an important metric because it's the one advertisers use to buy print magazine advertising, total audience is holding steady. According to GfK MRI fall data that was released just this past November, total print audience for the Magazine Media 360 measured titles is flat. And consider this question. What do Airbnb, CNET, Paperless Post, Net-a-Porter, WebMD, and Politico all have in common? They have all recognized the powerful value proposition of delivering content in the print format and have launched print magazines. Now, come on, how about Paperless Post? I get that it's not a magazine, but I couldn't resist it. It's not a magazine, but it is particularly telling and an ironic example of the power of print because Paperless Post created a print catalog to sell paper invitations. Now, this has to go down as one of the greatest backtracks of all time. In 2011 article citing Paperless Post founder Alexa Hirschfeld as one of the women in tech to watch, she asserts strongly that the future of communication will be digital, but she admits there may be a hybrid market for a while. 1 year later, in response to their pretty major move to extend their business into print, here's what she had to say. We didn't think we were ever going to do this. This is really something our users wanted. Among these digital to print transplants, several consistent themes emerge behind the thinking in launching print expansions to their brands. First, its tangibility and permanence within any space a reader finds themselves. Second, its credibility. We think there's a tremendous opportunity to extend our brand offline. Its ability to engage consumers for much longer than websites seem to. Print allows us to offer a more in-depth experience, as well as its strength as a critical brand building element of the whole content ecosystem. These are all benefits that the magazine media industry knows well. For anyone who considers these new launch antidotes as cherry picking, consider that for the past 10 years, the number of print magazines in circulation has remained constant at 9,000 titles. There were 231 new print titles launched in 2014 versus 185 in 2013, a 25% increase. Additionally, the survival rate of new print magazines, as defined as still in business after 2 years after launch, is at an all-time high of 85%. Its 10-year peak before that was 50%. So, as with any transition, there are going to be shakeouts, but what will remain constant is that for most, not all, but most magazine and increasingly non-magazine media brands, print will play an important and unique role in the delivery of an omni-channel content experience. So, what's next for Magazine Media 360? MPA has just completed an Magazine Media 360 roadshow to the top 14 media buying agencies. 120 buyers have requested and received the detailed report on a monthly basis, and the majority say they are planning on working a request for 360 data into their RFPs. This week, we're kicking off a client-side roadshow in Detroit, and we'll hit the top 20 clients around the country by the end of March. If the success of Magazine Media 360's adoption is measured by the level of the passion of the calls I receive, then we have a huge adoption on the Magazine Media side. But in addition to the thoughtful and often very fervent feedback we have gotten and we will continue to get from participating brands, we have solicited and we have received incredibly helpful input from the media buying community as well on how to create a dynamic version 2.0. We, as in the industry and our advertising partners, are considering now the best way to overlay engagement metrics, whether or not it makes sense to expand platforms to include experiential and other content consumption, and a host of definitional issues, which will continue to crop up as our audiences expand. One of the big challenges, and not just for magazine media, but for all media, is the issue of effectively capturing consumer demand on mobile devices, which, through current measurement methodologies, is underreported, as I said, for us and for everyone else. So we are working with Nielsen on the development of their innovative digital content ratings product, which will be rolled out this year. We will be participating in their beta to ensure that the ultimate product serves our industry's needs, and we're quite hopeful that through this enhanced census data, we will see improved reporting for the very important mobile platforms. Now, the other challenge, of course, is the fact that most of the trend and the performance reports about media still think about what we do through the lens of the print platform, underreporting the actual revenue in or advertising commitment to magazine media brands across the entire content ecosystem, which again fuels that incomplete and therefore inaccurate picture of the magazine media industry's performance. Unfortunately, at this point, there just isn't any credible or remotely accurate way to track actual revenue performance of magazines or any other media across all platforms. However, moving forward, you can count on us to continue to innovate around Magazine Media 360 in big, in bold, and in game-changing ways, with a singular focus on accelerating the growth of magazine media. As magazine companies and brands navigate through the throes of transition and digital transformation, as you consider a world of wearables, drones, 3D printing, programmatic buying, hyperlinked mobile marketing, content marketing, big data, a world where the acceleration of mobile isn't simply a channel shift, but the defining disruptor of our time. An ecosystem where consumers will be more active participants in media and content consumption. A world where 72% of adults actively use social media and 86% of people skip television commercials. Where online video now accounts for half of all mobile traffic. A world where in 2015, consumers will spend more time online than sleeping. As you address what is anything but the linear world of limitless opportunity and formidable challenge, your MPA will continue to work aggressively and relentlessly and with laser focus to help propel the industry's growth in this critical moment in time. As a strong voice to the press, advertisers, agencies, lawmakers, and our partners. As a forceful and vocal advocate for critical issues like postal reform and advertising tax deductibility. As a real business grower, supported by the Magazine Media 360 data, we will continue to promote magazine media's unique ability to capture long-term and create long-term and meaningful bonds between consumers and the companies that want to reach them. As a critical thought leader, encouraging and informing debate on the challenging issues facing the industry to help you to make the right decisions. And most importantly, as the catalyst for game-changing industry-wide initiatives like Magazine Media 360 version 2.0. In the meantime, in a world where consumer demand is the only comparable and consistent proxy for future health, it is the only comparable and consistent proxy for future health. Remember the mantra. Magazines are magazine media. 360 consumer demand for magazine media is up. Ergo, the industry is well positioned for future growth. We do not have it all figured out. No media does. And we still have our challenges. But we know, and we know this through the data, that one of them most decidedly is not a consumer problem. We have an engaged and we have a growing audience, the most coveted fundamental of them all, and we can and we will take that to the bank. Thank you very much. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce President of Condé Nast and chair of this conference, Bob Sauerberg. If you ask 10 people to describe Bob in 2 words, here's what you'd get. Easygoing, low-key, laid back, understated. I know that's 1 word, but you get the point. And you know what? It's all true. But that easy, infectious affability and calm belies how smart and visionary and relentlessly focused and effective he is. Bob is one of those rare leaders who sees the forest and the trees with equal clarity. And everyone who has ever worked with him has benefited from that. I know this firsthand not only because of his role as on the board of MPA, but also because I had the good fortune of working side by side with Bob for almost 7 years, which happens to be the same length as a common law marriage. He was the yin to my yang. I used to say he completed me. He would say I was an acquired taste. So, Bob's steely resolve and incredible smarts have served so well the New York Times company, Fairchild, and now Condé Nast, where he's leading the company's transformation and digital transition with force and grace, quietly leveraging some of the world's most prestigious brands into omni-channel powerhouses. Condé Nast is fortunate to have Bob at the helm, as are we for this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Sauerberg.
No one ever says nice things about me. That was my best marriage yet, really.